Hi, my name is Philip Arakelian. I'm a minor pastor here at Crossroads, and technology hates me. So just wanted to say hello. This is not a costume. I am not dressed up as Professor Snape. Joe is not going to pop in the doors dressed as Dumbledore, and Dave is not Hermione, and I'm pretty sure there's nobody that's going to pop out that's going to be Harry or Ron. So this is just how I dress. It makes it easier to pick out an outfit in the morning because I'm not savvy, nor am I a snappy dresser. Just ask my wife or my sister. They can contest to that. Dave Kurt makes awful comments and sends me texts about how I could dress better, but that's neither here nor there. But thank you for being here. Today we are talking about Church for Real. And when Joe decided to talk about Hebrews, me and him had to sit down and we had a conversation. And he said, Phil, I'm not sure if you want to do this, but we're going to be going through Hebrews. And if you want to, you can do the tail end. And I kind of got excited. I got excited because the problem is that I struggle from being a nerd. And I'm several facets of nerd. I think I hit like a 8.5 on the nerd scale. Like I could probably discuss with you the legitimacy of any Harry Potter book. I could tell you why Gandalf wrestled with the Balrog in the game in the Lord of the Rings. I could even want to discuss George R. R. Martin's thoughts of non-combatantism in the Game of Thrones series. I am a key nerd. I nerd out. And in this book, I find beautiful because Hebrews allows me to just dig deep in it and just go all out. So you may not be excited about this, but I am. So you're along for the ride. And they locked the doors, so you can't make it out of here. So when we start Hebrews, we often think of church for real, and a lot of times when I think of church for real is full of people, and people are messy. Your pastors are messy. When I think of church, I think church is messy. The person that stands before you is a messy person. I am a minor pastor here, and I am very messy. There are things that I do. There are things that I like. Just the person I am is messy. I like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, okay? I like Nicolas Cage movies. I thought The Rock was amazing, and Con Air can go down in history. No one can sport a mullet like that and make it a decent movie. So I even like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, like Get on the Chopper. Like these are flaws of my personality. These are the messiness that I am. But I like these things. And now sometimes you're going to come and we'll have conversations, and those conversations may be like, I'm really not too crazy about Nicolas Cage. And these are conversations that we can have. Thanks, BB House. And these are messy conversations. We're going into a political season in which we're going to have more messy conversations. Because we're full of people, and people have ideas, and people have thoughts, people have opinions. We've had messy conversations in the past. We're going to have them in the present. Some of them are going to happen today. Now, Hebrews is wrapped around a messy conversation. So many times, as scholars unpack Hebrews, Joe was talking about and Dave was talking about how we don't know the author of it. We know that there's tons of people that have influenced it, and it's great how they've influenced it. And they want to know how it was influenced and why. And if you notice behind me and next to me, I have these paintings. And these paintings, I want to make sure I get the laser pointer because I love the laser pointer. This is Paul the Apostle. This is Peter. And this is James, the brother of Jesus. And Hebrews, as Joe has laid out in the last 10 chapters, and Dave took over the last chapter, and I'm following up in 13, to set the stage for it. We set the stage as looking at these characters because these characters are arguing and had an argument about the first 12 chapters. Because Paul, it's not always Paul and Peter, by the way, that is doing the arguing. Paul's a blockhead, Peter's a blockhead, but the argument is actually happening between Paul and James, and Peter is the mediator. Is that odd that we see a man that has now grown into his position, that now, instead of talks, listens and mediates a conversation? So Peter has grown up into this responsibility, and we see how Peter is mediating Paul and James. And this argument has to do with the first 12 chapters, about the divinity of Christ and the knowingness of the fulfilling of the prophecy in the Old Testament, about how the Old Testament and the New Testament are central. And see, they're recognizing this as the early church because right now the Romans are conquering Britain. They're going up into Gaul. They are conquering as they go. And the early church is realizing that they're sending missionaries everywhere. They've already sent them to close to India. They're sending them all throughout the world. And right now, they are looking at Britain. They're looking at a church in Britain. And that, to them, are starting to think about, how do we solidify this faith? How do we have a conversation about, when you are not Jewish, having Jewish traditions? What does that look like? And people, and they're sitting down and they're having this argument. They're having this discussion. And that's how the first few books of Hebrews is laying out that discussion. It's laying out that argument. Now we step in to the last two chapters. Now we always say that they were influenced. This book is influenced by Peter or Paul or James because they have their rhetorical notes. But during this argument, the people that were more likely to have written this book, not proven, but would have been in the room listening to this argument, listening to this discussion, would have been Clement of Rome. Now, the people that I'm showing you, these are people that have laid down the stones that the church will be built upon. Peter has set the mark, put the dry line down, and is setting the foundation. But these men, when Peter and Paul die, and there is this vacuum that's left, and the only disciple that is alive is John, and he's stuck on the island of Patmos. He dies in 100, where Paul and Peter are put in the fact that they die around the 60s, the mid-60s. There's no one. They can only go to John to ask this. Or they've had to be in the room when the argument, the discussion, when the messiness took place. And this is Clement of Rome. He's a historical figure. He quotes this argument in some of his writings. He's one of the church fathers. Now I'm going to goof up some names because my iPad keeps on botching on me. Oh, see, I'm also going to goof up some slides too. This is Barnabas, thank you. Barnabas is in this room as well. He dies much later than Paul and Peter. But Barnabas is one of those that also is setting these stones. We have Luke. Luke is keen because he is a physician by trade. He has written the arguments. He is an orator. Then we have, I always goof up this name because my Latin stinks. Don't tell my teacher that. It is pronounced Apollotus. I think I said that right. He's another founder. He's another missionary that goes out. And then we have the most two controversial, Priscilla and Aquila. Now, it's stated that some scholars feel that the reason why there is so much shadowing of this book is that Priscilla would have written the book, and they would have redacted her name because she would have been a female. But her writings are heavily influenced. Now, it's not proven, but this is messiness. This is the messiness of life, right? This is what happens. This is the messiness of history. No one gets it right. We're going to talk more about that. But it is likely that she contributed to it. She was a student. All of these five, they were students of these three men. They were heavily influenced by these three men. Clement writes a letter that's not in the Bible, and you can definitely see how he is influenced by his teacher, how he's influenced by Paul. Again, I'm bad with the clicker. Okay. Now, when we think of these men, their echoings are in these two chapters. Of Hebrews 12, you see a bit of Paul. Hebrews 13, you see a lot of James and Peter. Now, because of messiness, Aaron Clark's going to read for me. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, this was. God loves you.
Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Let us run with the race that is set before us. Paul echoes these terms in other of his books. It's interesting because Paul, being a Roman, understands the concept of a good sporting event. He understands competition. He understands what it is to play, to compete. Now, there's a couple things I want you to notice here. It doesn't talk about winning, does it? No. It just talks about competing, running a race. And we want to have that in mind. It also is unique in the fact that it's a sports analogy, correct? We love sports analogies, right? Okay. I've been a coach for over 15 years. I coached lacrosse. I got to watch my son start to play lacrosse. And it took everything in my power not to want to interact with the coaches. And as being a coach, that's horrible to harass a coach about your kid. You know, like, he's got to pick up the ball like this, he's got to throw like this. And the coach is like, yes, thank you. But there are these baby steps. As coaches, we try and teach our kids. We teach them first, like, what it is to do a down ball pickup, what it is to cradle a ball, what it is to throw. And we get them to make these constant repetitions, and my kid's like, Dad, we've been throwing like this forever, but just keep on throwing. When I would coach at a higher level, I would have kids harass me all the time. They'd be like, Coach, why do you have me name my stick? Like, because I want you never to leave that stick. That stick keeps you in the game, right? Anybody played sports here? They named, like, right? Yes. What'd you name it? Lucille. Was it your bat? Yeah. See? Right? Because that keeps you in the game. And these are these little things that connect you with it. They're these little actions that before you know it, you have it. Before you know it, you're just instinctually, you grab that stick, you always hold on to that stick. When you get knocked down, we have kids do down-ups because we don't want them just to fall down and to wobble around like a U of M player. We want them to do a down-up. We want them to do a down-up, and we want them to get back after the ball. We want to get them back after the game, get them in the game. And we teach them these little steps. Joe has this analogy, and Joe was telling me about an Ironman he was doing. And in the Ironman, what he had to do was he had to prepare his body by running into the water, the cold water, and jumping in and getting his body ready for that shock. And then he would march back out and he'd do it again. And then he would do it again. And then he would do it again. And it just wasn't one time that took place. He had to do it. So then when he competed, when he entered himself into the ring, he was ready for it. Now, he may have not had done it as well as he wanted to, but he was still competing in that race. He was still doing it. Brené Brown states very clearly in one of her books about if you're going to enter into the ring and you're going to have commentary on another person, you better enter into that race. Otherwise, you're just a spectator. But this verse does not allow us to be a spectator, does it? And this is echoings from Paul. And also, this is a sports analogy. about competing, not winning, because so many times we think that's competition, right? Unless, we're playing Ohio State, then they do need to be beaten, right? But we think of a game being that we need to win. No, you have to compete. You need to compete. And this is apt because this is a sports analogy. This is an athletic analogy, not a war analogy. Not an analogy in which you go and you conquer and you destroy the other opinion, the other opponent. Right? Because, again, an echoing from Paul. The man has blood on his hands. That's why his hand is open. In some of these paintings, he actually is holding, there's a dark liquid in his hand because he has blood on his hands. Because he recognizes the humanity of the people that he has the discussion with. Because there are people that have thoughts and feelings and emotions and a history. They're not an abstract villain. Some of them are friends. But yet do they come to the same place? Because they're messy. Again, church is messy. This is a race. Another good echoing of Paul is the concept of how he lays out the body and how the body is necessary. Would somebody like to read this? I won't pick on Aaron again because he's got that great smile. Anybody? Go ahead.
Therefore, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed.
Concept of the body being necessary. That you have to have a healthy body. That you have to have that conversation. That healing has to take place. And that there's a way to do it. I hurt my shoulder recently, and if you've ever hurt your shoulder and you've tried to do things in that normal manner, it stinks. From scratching my armpit to like grabbing a cereal box, it stinks. And I do a manual labor job. I'm sweating up here right now. No, at least I'm a little gassy. Sorry. But it hurts. And it's not good when your body is not 100%. And sometimes having these conversations, we have to make sure that we don't go at it disjointed. That we don't go at it ill-fitting. That they are not the enemy. No, they are your friends. They are people. These are the echoings of Paul. And understanding those people in that body, it is messy. As we look at 13, and guess somebody's going to have to read it, so just get your hat caps on. As we look at 13, we see very much so the echoings of the next two gentlemen. We see the echoings of Peter. We see the echoings of James. Would anybody, again, this is messiness. So go ahead.
Let love of the brethren continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing.
Some have entertained angels and had not known it. We do hear an echoing of Peter there, don't we? A little bit of James. And I like the photo in which it says on there, St. James, the brother of Jesus. Or the brother of the Lord. Right? I was a little brother. Okay? You know where I'm going. Yes, my sister's in here and she just smiled. I hope Paul isn't listening to this, though. I was a little brother. I have an older brother named Paul. I have a sister named Lynette. You can harass her. Some of you are little siblings. You know what I'm talking about. I did eat my brother's Christmas candy. Yeah. It was Dad, too, but it wasn't just all. But no, like I was that little brother. You know what it's like to have siblings. You know what it is like to grow up with somebody. You act differently, right? But sometimes we entertain angels without knowing. Sometimes we entertain something that we don't know. We entertain someone that we don't think is listening. It's funny. I have a 3-season room or a 4-season room, and I call it sometimes I call it my war room when I have to write down a sermon. It has windows everywhere around it. If you've ever been to it, I have a coffee table in the center. Dave Kirk knows what I'm talking about, and it smells like smoke in there. And I pace. And I pace around that coffee table, and I do this, and I mutter to myself the whole entire time. And while I do it, believe it or not, because life is messy, I smoke a pipe. And I look like I'm a choo-choo train going around a circle. And the thing is it's an industrial glass door. And, you know, it's funny, one time when my wife was out of town, I had to get ready for a sermon, and I'm pacing like crazy, and I put the kids to bed. And then the next day, I come downstairs, and I'm getting the kids ready, and Grayson looks at me, and he's my oldest. He's like, you know, Dad, I think you should keep that Harry Potter joke in there. That one was good. And I'm like, what? He's like, well, we could tell you were thinking hard last night. I was like, oh, the devil, you say? He's like, yeah, you were working really hard last night. Sometimes we don't know who's listening. Sometimes we don't know who we entertain. Now, the thing is that we look at these chapters 13 and 12, and we notice that there's a litany of these little things that they ask you to do. There's this litany of little things that they're stating about these arguments, or just things that you do for yourself, things that you do for people. It just talks about grace, talks about mercy, talks about what it is to do these little actions. Just like in that sporting event, just like in the concept of running that race, you just don't show up one day and start running, but you do these little things. C.S. Lewis makes this statement about being your real self, being your true self, when you're at your weakest, right? When you're tired, when the tire is flat, and you had to fix it in the rain, and you had to still get groceries, and you show up to the grocery store, and there's that guy that you know you don't want to have a conversation with, asks you for money, and instead of telling him to walk on, you just instinctually hand it. It's that knee-jerk reaction. That's just that response. It doesn't come just learning how to run the race one time. It just comes with constant and consistent practice. It comes with repetition. You're not always going to get it right because it's messy. This place is messy. You don't have to get it right, though. That's why we have grace. You don't have to get all these things right. Would somebody mind reading this one? I promise it's the last one.
And do not neglect doing good and sharing, for with such sacrifices God is pleased.
Sometimes we have to look at these little things. And sometimes we have to look at sacrifice being more than just a financial thing. But sometimes it's sacrifice of pride. It's sacrifice of just saying, I don't know, and living in it. This is messy. This is complex. In a moment, Dave's going to come up, and Dave's going to talk to you about communion. And you know what? This is messy. This is not cut and dry. So many times, I've gone to seminary. We try and make it minute and finite. Joe talked about this, about the concept of the sin of certainty by Pete Enns. And how sometimes those certain words we find comfort in, and we don't want to move, but we need to embrace uncertainty. We need sometimes to embrace the mystery. Because if you can define God so well, is he then worth worshiping as a finite being? To be able to define something infinite? No, because it's messy. Because this is messy. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to. It's hard to come up with the concept of that you end this because people want a nice bow on it. Pastors are supposed to put a nice TD end to it, right? I'm sorry, I've failed you. Because life is messy. It's all it can be. I'd be lying to you if I told you it wasn't. But you can live into that messiness. There's grace in that messiness. We just have to be vulnerable enough to accept it from others and to be able to step into it ourselves.